Hello. The Advent reading for December 12 is titled Shepherd King, and we find our main passage in 2 Samuel for chapter 13, verses 8 through 13. Chapter 7, verses 8 through 13. And it says, David, this is what I, the Lord All-Powerful, say to you. I brought you in from the fields where you took care of sheep, and I made you the leader of my people. Wherever you went, I helped you and destroyed your enemies in front of you. I have made you one of the most famous people in the world. I have given my people Israel a land of their own where they can live in peace, and they won't have to tremble with fear anymore. Evil nations won't bother them as they did when I let judges rule my people, and I have kept your enemies from attacking you. Now I promise that you and your descendants will be kings. I'll choose one of your sons to be king when you reach the end of your life and are buried in the tomb of your ancestors. I'll make him a strong ruler, and no one will be able to take his kingdom away from him. He will be the one to build the temple for me. After 40 years in the wilderness, God brought the Israelites into the land that he had promised them. Now that they were living in the land, God's people wanted a human king, like the nations around them. They ultimately rejected God as their ruler, protector, and judge because they wanted a king that could go out and fight their battles. God warned the people that a human king would take many things from them, but they kept demanding. So God gave them what they wanted. A man named Saul was chosen as Israel's first king. Saul was the kind of king the people wanted, but he didn't obey some very important rules God had given him. He didn't submit himself to God as the King of Kings, so the throne was taken away from him. God then chose a young shepherd boy named David to be Israel's second king. David was called a man after God's own heart. This means David loved God and was devoted to him, but David still had a sin problem. In fact, he sinned in some big and terrible ways. But David confessed his sin and turned back to God. When David became king of Israel, God was living among his people in a tent called the tabernacle. The tabernacle is where the tablets of stone were given to Moses and were kept. It was where God's glory lived among the people. Men called priests worked in the tabernacle. The priests helped the people worship God by offering the blood of animals to him as sacrifices, a way to pay for their sins. David wanted God's glory to live in a real building, not just a tent. He wanted to build God a house called a temple, but the timing wasn't yet quite right. Instead, God promised to make David a house, which means a big family of kings, and a kingdom that would last forever. God promised that a king from David's family would always sit on Israel's throne. God kept his promise. Many years later, a child from David's family was born, a king, the King of Kings, in fact. Like David, he was also a shepherd. He called himself the Good Shepherd because, unlike any of the other kings from David's family, he had no sin. This shepherd gave up his life to save the sheep, God's people. He was the only one able to both save humans from sin and rule on David's throne forever. The story tonight reminds us and highlights the fact that David was a shepherd boy chosen by God to be king over his people. David's heart was fully devoted to the one true God, and God promised David a kingdom that would last forever. And as we think about this first coming of Jesus Christ, we need to reflect on the fact that Jesus is the sinless son of David. He is the shepherd king who laid down his life for the sheep. And one day, he will come again and reign forever.